On the night of my gallery opening, not a single family member showed up. Not even my husband, who promised to be my anchor through the evening. They all went to my sister's impromptu engagement party instead. 24 hours later, I posted one picture on Instagram. Less than an hour after that single post, I received 63 missed calls and countless frantic messages from them. What could have shaken them so suddenly? Keep watching to find out. They thought they were backing the winning horse in a race they'd orchestrated themselves, but they forgot that the track was designed by someone who'd been watching from the shadows all along. Just not in the way they assumed. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that subscribe button. This story gets wild. My name is Queen, and for 28 years, I've been the understudy in my sister Serafina's one-woman Broadway production. Our family operates less like a loving unit and more like a ruthless talent agency, with my mother Cordelia as the cutthroat manager and Serafina as the bankable star. Every conversation, every gathering, every milestone revolves around amplifying her brand while I fade into the carefully orchestrated background. Serafina did everything according to our family's unwritten constitution. She married visibility over substance, building a social media empire where every breakfast looked like a magazine shoot and every thought was packaged into bite-sized inspiration for her 2.3 million followers. Her engagement to Bartholomew Ashworth III wasn't just a romantic union. It was a merger between her digital influence and his family's old money prestige. Their relationship was a carefully curated performance where even their arguments were probably focus grouped for maximum engagement. My mother Cordelia managed this empire with the precision of a Swiss timepiece and the warmth of a board meeting. She saw Serafina's content calendar as a stock portfolio, each post a strategic investment in the family's social capital. Every like was a dividend, every brand partnership a hostile takeover of my relevance. I, on the other hand, was the experimental project that never showed promising returns. I chose a different stage entirely. I chose art, and I chose Jasper. Jasper seemed like my rebellion made manifest. Where Serafina's world was all ring lights and strategic authenticity, mine was gallery spaces and genuine discovery. He was an investment banker, sophisticated enough to navigate my family's social expectations while supporting my passion for championing emerging artists. His tailored suits and financial acumen should have been enough to earn their grudging respect, but there was something about my choices that always felt threatening to their carefully maintained ecosystem. What I didn't know was that Jasper was conducting his own performance, and I was just one part of his carefully diversified portfolio. The gallery I'd spent 3 years building occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in what used to be the city's forgotten arts district. Sterling Pembroke, my landlord, had owned the building for decades, watching the neighborhood transform from industrial wasteland to creative haven. He was a man of few words but keen observation, the kind of person who noticed everything while appearing to care about nothing. My gallery specialized in launching artists who created work that made people stop mid-conversation and stare. Not because it was pretty or safe, but because it reached through the pretense and grabbed something real. I'd developed an eye for spotting talent that galleries with 10 times my budget consistently overlooked. My artists didn't need trust funds or family connections. They needed someone who understood that great art comes from authentic places, not focus groups. Comment below if you've ever had your passion dismissed by people who should support you. You're going to love where this goes. The opening night that changed everything was meant to showcase 3 artists I'd been mentoring for over a year. Kai Nakamura created installations that turned gallery spaces into immersive emotional landscapes. His latest piece transformed our main room into what felt like walking through someone else's dreams. Zara Al-Rashid painted portraits that captured not just faces but entire inner worlds, each canvas a window into stories people had never told anyone. And Phoenix Martinez sculpted with recycled materials, creating pieces that were simultaneously beautiful and urgently political. I'd spent months planning this opening. Not just the logistics, but the narrative. This wasn't just an art show, it was a statement about what happened when you gave genuinely talented people the platform they deserved. I'd invited collectors, critics, and curators who I knew would appreciate work that didn't follow market trends but created them instead. My father Thaddeus had promised to give the opening speech, a 5-minute introduction that would legitimize the event in the eyes of anyone who still doubted my judgment. For weeks, he'd practiced his remarks, asking thoughtful questions about each artist's process and vision. It was the first time I could remember him taking my work seriously, treating my gallery like a real business rather than an expensive hobby. The day of the opening, I spent hours arranging and rearranging, ensuring every sightline was perfect. The catering was elegant but unpretentious, wine selected to complement rather than overshadow. The lighting made each piece look like it was glowing from within. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready for the 7 o'clock opening. At 5:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Serafina. Emergency family meeting at Mom's. Bartholomew just proposed properly and we're announcing the engagement tonight. Drop everything, this is happening now. The messages started cascading immediately after. Cordelia, darling, I know tonight is important to you, but Serafina needs us. Bartholomew's parents are flying in. This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Thaddeus, Queen, my girl, I'm so sorry. Your mother says this engagement party can't wait. Family comes first. You understand. The gallery opening began at 7. By 7:15, it was clear that my family had made their choice. The space that should have been humming with conversation and discovery felt cavernous and cold. A handful of art lovers who'd found my work through their own networks wandered through, appreciating the pieces while I stood near the entrance, checking my phone for messages that never came. At 8:30, Sterling appeared. He wasn't dressed for an opening, just his usual understated elegance, dark jeans, and a perfectly fitted sweater that probably cost more than most people's rent. He moved through the space slowly, studying each piece with the kind of attention that made artists feel seen. If you've ever been abandoned when you needed support most, let me know in the comments. The payback in this story is absolutely perfect. After examining every piece, Sterling approached me near the back of the gallery where I was pretending to arrange already perfect display materials. Your family? He asked, his tone neutral but his eyes understanding everything I wasn't saying. I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. Their loss, he said simply. Then, after a pause, these artists are remarkable. Especially Nakamura's installation. It reminded me of something I saw in Tokyo 20 years ago, but more emotionally complex. He pulled out his phone and made a brief call, speaking in tones too low for me to overhear. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Someone I know is going to want to see this work. Would tomorrow afternoon work for a private viewing? The next morning, I discovered Jasper's betrayal in the most mundane way possible. He'd left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered, and when it buzzed with a message, I glanced over out of habit. The name on the screen made my blood freeze. Octavia. Octavia. Serafina's best friend, maid of honor, and business partner in several sponsored content deals. The woman who'd been at our dinner table dozens of times, who knew intimate details about my marriage, who'd helped plan our anniversary party just 2 months earlier. The message preview was explicit enough to make everything clear. Can't wait until tonight. Sarah's engagement party will be the perfect cover for us to slip away. I stood in my kitchen, holding my cheating husband's phone, understanding with crystalline clarity that my family's abandonment the night before hadn't been about supporting Serafina's moment. It had been about providing cover for my husband's affair with my sister's best friend. The shower was still running. I had maybe 3 minutes before Jasper emerged, and in those 3 minutes, I made a decision that would reshape everything that came after. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or throw things or demand explanations. Instead, I took screenshots of the most damning messages and quietly placed his phone back exactly where he'd left it. Then I went to my laptop and began researching divorce attorneys who specialized in high-asset cases involving adultery. Hit the like button if you think Queen's playing this exactly right. Trust me, her strategy gets even better. Sterling's mysterious contact turned out to be Evangeline Cross, a name that made art dealers speak in hushed, reverent tones. She was a reclusive billionaire who'd spent 30 years building one of the world's most significant private art collections. She didn't do interviews, didn't attend galas, and certainly didn't make house calls to small galleries in converted warehouses. Except that Tuesday afternoon, she did. Evangeline arrived without fanfare, a woman in her 60s whose understated appearance, simple black clothing, minimal jewelry, graying hair pulled back efficiently, made her seem like someone's elegant aunt rather than one of the most powerful collectors in the international art world. She moved through my gallery with the focused intensity of a scholar, spending long minutes with each piece, asking questions that revealed both deep knowledge and genuine curiosity. "This installation," she said, standing in the center of Nakamura's dreamscape. "It's extraordinary. How did you find him?" I explained how I'd discovered Kai working as a night janitor in another gallery, creating his installations in the empty spaces during his shifts. How I'd convinced him to trust me with his first real exhibition opportunity. And the others. I told her about Zara's journey from painting murals on abandoned buildings to creating these intimate portraits. About Phoenix's evolution from street art to gallery-worthy sculptures that made political statements without sacrificing aesthetic beauty. Evangeline listened to every story, asking follow-up questions that showed she understood not just what she was seeing, but the vision behind how I'd assembled this particular constellation of talent. After 2 hours, she made an offer that literally made me sit down. "I'm launching a new initiative," she said, her tone matter-of-fact despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "A traveling exhibition that will showcase emerging artists in venues across 3 continents. I need a curator who understands how to spot authentic talent and present it in ways that create lasting impact. The position would be based in New York, with extensive travel and a budget that would make most museum directors envious." The salary she mentioned was more than triple what I made from the gallery. The travel would take me to art centers in cities I'd only dreamed of visiting. The platform would let me champion dozens of artists like Kai, Zara, and Phoenix. "Why me?" I asked, still processing the surreal nature of the conversation. "Sterling showed me photographs of your work 3 years ago," she said. "There was a piece by an artist you represented, a sculpture made from recovered materials that told the story of climate displacement. I tried to acquire it through intermediaries, but the artist had already sold it to a family who'd lost their home to flooding. They said you'd arranged the sale, refusing any commission because you believed the piece belonged with people who understood its message." I remembered the sculpture. And I remembered the family, refugees who'd connected with Phoenix's work on a level that transcended market value. "That kind of integrity is rare in this business," Evangeline continued. "Sterling has been telling me about your work ever since. When he called yesterday, I knew it was time to meet." Comment below if you've ever had someone believe in you when everyone else gave up, because Queen's story is about to get incredible. I accepted Evangeline's offer that afternoon, though the position wouldn't officially start for 3 weeks. She wanted to give me time to transition my current artists to galleries that could continue supporting their careers. She also, with a knowing smile, suggested I might want to handle any personal business that required attention. That evening, I sat in our apartment while Jasper got ready for another work dinner that I now knew was a cover for meeting Octavia. He spent extra time styling his hair, applied cologne with unusual care, and checked his appearance multiple times in the hallway mirror. "Don't wait up," he said, kissing my forehead with the casual affection of a man who believed his deceptions were flawless. "These client dinners can run late." After he left, I called the divorce attorney I'd researched that morning and scheduled a consultation for the following day. Then I went to bed early, sleeping more peacefully than I had in months. The next morning, while Jasper was at what he claimed was a breakfast meeting with investors, I met with Helena Blackwood, a divorce attorney whose reputation for handling complex asset division cases was matched only by her reputation for destroying unfaithful spouses in court. "Adultery, documented evidence, and significant shared assets," she said after reviewing my situation. "This will be straightforward. The screenshots you've collected are admissible, and if we can establish a pattern of deception, we can argue for punitive measures beyond standard asset division." She explained how adultery cases worked in our state, outlining a strategy that would not only secure my financial independence but also ensure that Jasper's betrayal became part of the public record. Given his position at a conservative investment firm, professional consequences would be unavoidable. "How long do you want to wait before filing?" she asked. 2 weeks, I said. "There's something else I need to do first." Like this video if you love a perfectly executed plan. Queen's timing is absolutely flawless. The next 2 weeks passed like a strange dream. I continued running my gallery, finalizing arrangements for my artist transitions while secretly preparing for my new role with Evangeline. Jasper continued his affair with Octavia, growing increasingly careless about covering his tracks. Serafina posted a relentless stream of engagement content, turning her relationship into a marketing campaign. My parents basked in the reflected glow of their successful daughter's social media empire. None of them bothered to ask about my gallery opening or how the business was developing. My world was invisible to them, which made my next move possible. On a Thursday afternoon, I met Evangeline at a private airfield outside the city. She'd invited me to preview her personal collection at her estate in the Bahamas, both as preparation for my new role and as what she called a small celebration of your decision to take on this challenge. The private jet was understated luxury incarnate. The interior looked more like a sophisticated living room than commercial aircraft, with cream leather seating and art books arranged on polished wood surfaces. As we took off, I watched the city shrink below us, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about what came next. Evangeline's estate occupied a private island that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that true luxury whispers rather than shouts. The main house was contemporary but warm, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed views of impossibly blue water. But the real revelation was the art. Her collection wasn't just museum quality. It was personally curated with the kind of vision that created dialogue between pieces separated by centuries and continents. A 15th-century altarpiece faced a contemporary video installation, both exploring themes of devotion and transformation. Ancient ceramics shared space with cutting-edge digital art, creating conversations about human creativity across time and culture. "This is my laboratory," Evangeline explained as we toured the spaces. "I collect pieces that speak to each other, that create new meanings when placed in proximity. The traveling exhibition will work the same way, not just showcasing individual artists, but creating conversations between their visions." We spent 3 days discussing curatorial philosophy, examining pieces from every angle, and planning the framework for the traveling exhibition. It was the most intellectually stimulating period I'd experienced in years, like being enrolled in a master class designed specifically for my interests and ambitions. On our final evening, as we sat on the terrace watching the sunset paint the water in impossible colors, I took out my phone and captured a single image. My silhouette against the view, the private jet visible on the airstrip in the background, the estate's sophisticated architecture framing the composition. The caption was simple: "New Horizons." I posted it to Instagram and immediately put my phone on airplane mode. If you're wondering what happened next, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. The family meltdown is epic. The flight back to the city gave me 6 hours of digital silence to prepare for what was coming. When I switched my phone off airplane mode as we landed, the screen exploded with notifications. 63 missed calls. Over 200 text messages. Direct messages on every social platform I used. The mathematical progression was almost artistic in its precision. The first few messages were curious: "Where are you?" and "What's this picture about?" But as hours passed without response, curiosity became concern, concern became alarm, and alarm became something approaching panic. My mother had clearly conducted a full investigation. The private jet's tail number had been photographed by one of Serafina's followers and reverse-searched through aircraft registration databases. Evangeline's name appeared in message after message, along with speculation about how I could possibly have access to such exclusive circles. Serafina's messages were masterpieces of barely controlled hysteria. "This is some kind of joke, right?" Evolved into, "Are you trying to upstage my engagement?" and finally into, "Mom says you're with Evangeline Cross? How is that possible?" But it was my father's messages that revealed the depth of their confusion. Thaddeus had spent years dismissing my gallery as an expensive hobby, humoring my creative phase while waiting for me to settle into something more conventional. Now he was confronted with evidence that my supposedly frivolous career had somehow provided access to levels of influence he'd never imagined possible. His final message, sent just hours before my landing, contained a note of desperation I'd never heard from him before. "Queen, please call. We need to understand what's happening. This changes everything." I drove home from the airport in silence, letting their increasingly frantic messages accumulate while I prepared for the most important conversation of my life. Comment if you've ever had people suddenly pay attention when they realized you were more successful than they thought. The confrontation is incredible. I waited until the next morning to return any calls. By then, the message count had climbed past 300. I chose to answer my mother's call while sitting in my gallery, surrounded by the work of artists whose careers I'd helped launch, in the space I'd built through years of patient dedication to something they'd never understood. The phone rang exactly once before Cordelia answered. "Queen. Thank God. We've been absolutely frantic. Where have you been? We've been calling for days." I let the silence stretch for a moment, enjoying the unfamiliar sensation of holding power in our relationship. "I've been working, Mother. In the Bahamas, with a client." "A client?" Her voice carried the particular tone she used when she suspected someone was lying but couldn't prove it. "Darling, we saw your photograph. That was Evangeline Cross's estate, wasn't it? And her private jet." "Yes." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. No explanation, no justification, just simple confirmation that threatened to overturn everything they thought they knew about my life. "I don't understand," Cordelia continued, her carefully maintained composure beginning to fracture. "How do you know Evangeline Cross? She's one of the most important art collectors in the world. She doesn't just invite people to her private island." "She offered me a position," I said, matching her tone for casual matter-of-factness. "Senior curator for a new international exhibition initiative. I accepted." I could hear Serafina in the background, her voice a sharp whisper. "Ask her about the salary. Ask her about the contract. This doesn't make sense." "A position," Cordelia repeated, as if testing the words in a foreign language. "Doing what, exactly?" "Identifying and showcasing emerging artists across 3 continents. Building exhibitions that will tour major cities internationally. Working with a budget that's larger than most museum endowments." The silence on the other end was profound enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "The salary," Cordelia finally managed, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I named the figure Evangeline had offered. The sound my mother made was like a punctured balloon slowly deflating. Like this video if you love the moment when family members realize they've completely underestimated someone. It gets even better. "How?" Cordelia whispered. "How is this possible? You run a small gallery in a converted warehouse. How do you know people like Evangeline Cross?" This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. The opportunity to explain, with perfect clarity, the difference between their approach to success and mine. "I know Evangeline through Sterling," I said. "My landlord. The man who owned the building you all dismissed as a sign of my limited ambitions." "Sterling." She pronounced his name like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "The building owner. Sterling Pembroke. He's one of the most respected art dealers in the international market. He retired from active dealing years ago, but maintained relationships with collectors and curators worldwide. He's been watching my work for 3 years, and when he saw the quality of artists I was representing, he introduced me to people who could appreciate what I was building." I could hear frantic whispering on the other end. Serafina demanding details, my father asking questions in the background. The carefully maintained hierarchy of our family was collapsing in real time. "Sterling has been observing how I work," I continued, my voice steady and conversational. "He's seen me turn down commissions from wealthy collectors who wanted to buy artists' work for the wrong reasons. He's watched me arrange sales where I refused payment because I believed certain pieces belonged with people who would understand their significance. He's noticed that I treat artists like partners rather than commodities, and that approach has earned me a reputation for integrity that resonates with people who actually matter in the art world." The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd hung up. "You're saying," Cordelia finally managed, "that your landlord is some kind of secret art world power broker?" "I'm saying that your definition of success is so narrow and superficial that you've been blind to everything actually happening in my life. You see a warehouse gallery and assume failure. Sterling sees a young curator developing innovative approaches to artist representation. You see struggling artists and assume I'm wasting my time. Evangeline sees emerging talent being nurtured by someone with exceptional instincts for identifying authenticity. I took a breath, preparing for the revelation that would completely reshape our family dynamic. There's something else you should know, I said, my tone remaining conversational despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. I've filed for divorce from Jasper. Adultery. With documented evidence. Subscribe if you want to see how this confrontation ends. The final twist will blow your mind. The explosion of voices on the other end was immediate and overlapping. Cordelia's shocked questions, Serafina's demands for details, my father's confused protests. I waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. Jasper has been having an affair with Octavia for at least 4 months, possibly longer. They've been using family events as cover for their meetings. Your engagement party, Serafina, was particularly convenient for them. The silence that followed was different from the previous pauses. This was the sound of people trying to process information that contradicted everything they thought they understood. Octavia. Serafina's voice was barely audible. My maid of honor. My business partner. The same Octavia who knows intimate details about my marriage, who's been in our home dozens of times, who helped plan our anniversary celebration 2 months ago. I could hear someone crying. Whether it was from shock, embarrassment, or genuine emotion was impossible to determine. The evidence is extensive, I continued. Messages, photographs, hotel receipts. My attorney assures me it's more than sufficient for a favorable settlement. Jasper's firm takes a very dim view of employees whose personal scandals reflect poorly on their professional reputation. Cordelia's voice was shaking. This is going to cause an enormous scandal. Serafina's wedding, the social implications. Yes, I agreed. It probably will. Just like my gallery opening caused you to make choices that revealed your actual priorities. The connection felt different now. For the first time in our relationship, I was speaking from a position of strength while they scrambled to understand how thoroughly they'd misjudged the situation. I have to go, I said, before they could formulate responses. My attorney is calling, and then I'm meeting with Evangeline's team to discuss my transition timeline. I'll be relocating to New York within the month. If you've ever wanted to see perfect karma in action, make sure you like and subscribe. The ending of this story is absolutely perfect. I ended the call before the protests could begin, silencing my phone and placing it face down on my desk. For the first time in years, I felt completely free from the weight of their approval or disapproval. The next few days unfolded with the elegant inevitability of a perfectly choreographed performance. Helena Blackwood served divorce papers to Jasper at his office, ensuring maximum professional embarrassment. The adultery allegations became part of public record, accessible to anyone curious enough to search. Within hours, the news had reached his colleagues, his clients, and his boss. Jasper's attempts to contact me were futile. I'd changed my locks, blocked his number, and arranged to stay at a hotel while finalizing my move to New York. His pleas for explanation or negotiation went through Helena, who informed him that his best strategy was to accept our settlement terms and minimize further damage to his already destroyed reputation. The ripple effects reached Serafina's world with equal efficiency. Octavia's betrayal didn't just end my marriage, it imploded my sister's carefully curated social media empire. The woman who'd been documenting their perfect friendship, their business partnerships, their shared celebrations was exposed as someone capable of spectacular betrayal. Serafina's followers began questioning everything they'd been sold about authentic relationships and genuine connection. Bartholomew's family, old money conservatives who valued discretion above all else, were horrified by the scandal. An affair was bad enough, but an affair that destroyed 2 families and generated social media drama was unacceptable. They pressured Bartholomew to reconsider the engagement, suggesting that perhaps he should marry into a family with more developed judgment about character. Comment below if you think Queen handled this perfectly, because the final confrontation is incredible. My parents' final attempt at reconciliation came exactly 1 week before my move to New York. They appeared at my gallery unannounced, all 3 of them looking like diplomats arriving for delicate peace negotiations. Cordelia was perfectly styled but somehow diminished, her usual commanding presence replaced by something approaching humility. Thaddeus looked older than I remembered, the weight of his poor judgment etched in his posture. Serafina appeared fragile, her social media confidence stripped away by the collapse of her carefully constructed world. "We need to talk," Cordelia announced, though her tone lacked its usual authority. I gestured toward the seating area in the back of the gallery, allowing them to arrange themselves while I remained standing, a subtle power dynamic that none of us missed. "We've made mistakes," Thaddeus began, his voice carrying genuine regret. "Serious mistakes in judgment. About you, about your work, about what matters." Serafina looked up from examining her hands. "I didn't know about Jasper and Octavia. I would never have, if I'd known what they were doing." "You would never have what?" I asked. "Arranged an engagement party on the same night as my gallery opening? Convinced our parents to abandon my most important professional moment for your social media content?" "That's not..." She started, then stopped, apparently recognizing that any defense would only make things worse. "We want to make this right," Cordelia said, leaning forward with the intensity she usually reserved for her most important social negotiations. "We want to be part of your new life, your success. We want to support what you're building." I looked at each of them in turn, these people who'd shaped my understanding of family and belonging, who'd taught me that love was conditional and success was measured by their approval. "You want to be part of my success now that you understand its magnitude," I said. "You want access to the connections and opportunities I've built through years of work you dismissed as worthless. You want to repair relationships you damaged through choices that revealed your actual values." None of them denied it, which was perhaps the most honest moment we'd shared in years. "But here's what you've never understood," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "The success you want to claim isn't something you can buy or demand access to. It's built on relationships formed through consistency, integrity, and genuine respect. It comes from treating people well when you have nothing to gain from them. It emerges from valuing authentic connection over social positioning." I walked to the window overlooking the street where I'd spent 3 years building something meaningful from nothing. Sterling didn't introduce me to Evangeline because he thought I'd be useful to him. He did it because he'd observed my character over years of small interactions. Evangeline didn't offer me this position because of my family connections or social media following. She offered it because I've demonstrated the kind of integrity that can't be faked or purchased. Like this video if you believe in earning respect through actions, not demands. The ending is absolutely perfect. I turned back to face them, these people I'd spent a lifetime trying to please. "You're welcome to try to rebuild relationships with me," I said. "But it will happen on terms that honor what I've learned about authentic connection. No shortcuts, no immediate access to my professional world, no assumption that family title grants you privileges you haven't earned." Cordelia opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to recognize that anything she said would only confirm my point. "I'm moving to New York next week," I continued. "I'll be traveling internationally for months at a time, working with artists and collectors you've never heard of but who are reshaping how the world thinks about contemporary art. If you want to be part of my life, you'll need to prove you understand the difference between supporting someone and exploiting their success." I walked toward the gallery entrance, a clear signal that our conversation was ending. "The 63 missed calls weren't expressions of love or concern," I said, opening the door. "They were panic responses to realizing you'd miscalculated the value of what you'd discarded. Real relationships don't work that way." They left without additional protest, perhaps finally understanding that the daughter they'd underestimated had grown into someone who wouldn't accept less than she deserved. Make sure you're subscribed because the final twist in this story shows exactly how this all played out. It's absolutely incredible. 6 months later, I was standing in a contemporary art museum in London, surrounded by the opening reception for Emerging Voices, the traveling exhibition I'd curated for Evangeline's foundation. The space hummed with the kind of conversation that happens when people encounter art that changes their perspective on what's possible. Kai Nakamura's latest installation transformed the museum's main hall into an immersive experience exploring displacement and belonging. Zara al-Rashid's portraits lined an entire corridor, each painting a window into stories of resilience and transformation. Phoenix Martinez's sculptures anchored the contemporary gallery, political statements rendered in materials rescued from environmental destruction. 36 other artists from 6 continents shared the space, their work creating the kind of dialogue Evangeline had envisioned. Conversations between cultures, generations, and artistic traditions that illuminated universal human experiences. Sterling appeared beside me as I watched a family pause in front of one of Phoenix's pieces, their young daughter asking questions that demonstrated the exact kind of engagement we'd hoped to inspire. "Proud of you," he said simply, his usual understated approach to profound moments. "Thank you," I said, meaning not just for the compliment, but for everything he'd made possible through 3 years of quiet support and strategic introductions. My phone buzzed with a message from Evangeline, who was attending the opening reception in Tokyo for the exhibition's Asian tour. "London looks magnificent. The reviews are exceptional. You've exceeded every expectation." As I put my phone away, I noticed a familiar figure near the entrance. Cordelia stood just inside the doorway, looking simultaneously proud and intimidated by the scale and sophistication of what she was witnessing. She'd flown to London unannounced, apparently deciding that seeing my work firsthand was worth the risk of being told she wasn't welcome. I approached her slowly, curious about what had motivated the trip. "It's extraordinary," she said before I could speak. "All of this. The art, the space, the people. I had no idea." "No idea about what?" "About what you were building. About who you'd become. About what I'd missed by not paying attention." She looked around the gallery, taking in the international crowd, the sophisticated presentation, the obvious respect my work commanded in this context. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Not to ask for anything, not to try to insert myself into your success. Just to acknowledge that I failed to see what was right in front of me." It wasn't the conversation I'd expected, but it felt like a beginning. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by people who should have supported you? 2 years later, I received a wedding invitation that made me smile. Serafina was marrying a quiet documentary photographer she'd met while volunteering at a literacy nonprofit. The engagement announcement was a simple Instagram post. No staged photography, no sponsored content, just a candid picture of 2 people who looked genuinely happy together. She'd rebuilt her career around authentic content creation, using her platform to highlight social causes and real stories rather than manufactured lifestyle fantasy. Her follower count was smaller but more engaged, her partnerships more selective but more meaningful. The invitation included a handwritten note. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that watching you build something real helped me understand the difference between performing a life and actually living one. Thank you." I attended the wedding, held in a small garden venue that prioritized beauty over spectacle. Serafina walked down the aisle escorted by both our parents, all of whom had spent 2 years learning how to support her choices rather than managing them. During the reception, Thaddeus approached me as I stood watching the celebration from a quiet corner. "I've been reading about your exhibitions," he said. "The reviews, the impact on the artists you've championed. I finally understand what you were trying to build. What took you so long?" I asked, though my tone held curiosity rather than accusation. He was quiet for a moment, watching as Serafina and her new husband shared their first dance to a song that actually meant something to them rather than one chosen for its social media potential. I was so focused on what success looked like from the outside that I forgot to pay attention to what it felt like from the inside, he said. "You were building something meaningful, and I kept waiting for you to build something impressive instead." "They're not mutually exclusive," I pointed out. "No," he agreed. "But meaningful takes longer to recognize if you're not looking for the right things." We stood in comfortable silence, watching my sister dance with someone who loved her for reasons that had nothing to do with her social media following or family connections. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. "You and me, the family." I considered the question carefully. 2 years of distance had given me perspective on what was worth preserving and what needed to be rebuilt from scratch. "We're going to be different," I said finally. "Better, I think, but different." Drop a comment if you believe people can actually change, because this ending shows exactly how transformation happens. 3 months after Serafina's wedding, I received an unexpected call from Jasper. Helena Blackwood had warned me that he might eventually attempt contact once the legal proceedings were completely finalized and enough time had passed for him to process the full consequences of his actions. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Queen. His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, the sound of someone who'd spent 2 years understanding the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. I know I have no right to call. I know I don't deserve your time or attention. I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging him from continuing. I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Not just the marriage, but the person you were becoming, the world you were building that I was too short-sighted to appreciate. What happened to Octavia? I asked, genuinely curious about how their affair had evolved once it was no longer forbidden and secretive. It ended within 6 months, he said, his voice flat. Turns out our connection was built on the excitement of betrayal rather than anything sustainable. When it became legitimate, we discovered we had nothing in common except mutual selfishness. I found myself feeling something approaching pity, though not enough to offer comfort. I've been following your career, he continued. The exhibitions, the artists you've launched, the impact you're having. I read an interview where you talked about building authentic relationships in the art world, and I realized that's what I saw you doing throughout our marriage. I just never understood its value. Why are you telling me this? Because I wanted you to know that losing you taught me the difference between what I thought I wanted and what actually mattered. It's a lesson that came too late to save us, but not too late to change how I treat the people in my life. It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and it felt like the proper ending to a chapter that had closed years earlier. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, meaning it. I hope you keep building what you're building, he replied. The world needs more people who create rather than consume. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, let me know in the comments. Queen's journey shows that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing. 5 years after that night in my empty gallery, I stood on the balcony of my apartment in Manhattan, looking out over a city that had become home in ways I'd never expected. The Emerging Voices exhibition had evolved into a permanent foundation that operated in 12 countries, launching over 200 artists into sustainable careers and reshaping how the international art community thought about discovery and development. Sterling had become not just a mentor but a genuine friend, someone whose quiet wisdom guided major decisions and whose presence made success feel less solitary. Evangeline had evolved from employer to collaborator, our shared vision for authentic art curation creating initiatives that influenced museum programming worldwide. My relationship with my family had stabilized into something healthier than it had ever been. Cordelia still occasionally slipped into her old patterns of social maneuvering, but she'd learned to recognize and correct herself. Thaddeus had begun volunteering at local arts organizations, finally understanding the difference between supporting creativity and managing it. Serafina had found genuine happiness in a life built around substance rather than appearance. But the most profound change was internal. I'd stopped seeking validation from people whose approval was based on criteria I didn't respect. I'd learned to recognize authentic connection from transactional relationship. I'd discovered that the most satisfying success comes from building something that outlasts your participation in it. My phone buzzed with a message from Kai, whose latest installation was opening at the Museum of Modern Art next month. None of this would have happened without someone believing in work that nobody else understood. Thank you for seeing what we were trying to say before we even knew how to say it clearly. Messages like that arrived regularly now, from artists whose careers had launched through platforms I'd created, from curators who'd learned new approaches through programs I'd developed, from collectors who'd discovered that authentic art appreciation was more satisfying than market speculation. Subscribe if this story inspired you to trust your own judgment over other people's expectations, because that's the real lesson here. The final piece of closure came 6 years later, at the opening of a retrospective exhibition celebrating the Emerging Voices Foundation's impact on contemporary art. The museum had dedicated 3 floors to showcasing work by artists we'd supported, creating a visual timeline of how authentic talent development could reshape entire creative movements. As I moved through the galleries, watching visitors engage with art that might never have found its audience without our intervention, I felt the deep satisfaction of work that had grown beyond personal success into genuine cultural impact. Near the end of the evening, I found myself in the museum's sculpture garden, taking a moment of quiet away from the celebration inside. Sterling appeared beside me, as he often did during moments that called for reflection rather than conversation. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question that had become something of a tradition at major milestones. I considered it seriously, as I always did. Regret about the family relationships that had been damaged before they could be repaired. Regret about the years spent seeking approval from people whose judgment I'd outgrown. Regret about the marriage that had ended in betrayal. "No," I said finally. "All of it led to this. The abandonment taught me self-reliance. The betrayal taught me authentic loyalty. The dismissal taught me to value recognition that comes from people who understand what I'm actually building." And the 63 missed calls. I smiled, remembering that frantic day when my family's panic revealed how thoroughly they'd miscalculated my trajectory. Those calls were the sound of people realizing they'd been playing by the wrong rules in a game they never understood, I said. They thought success was about accumulating approval and maintaining appearances. They didn't realize it was about creating value and earning respect. Sterling nodded, his understanding complete without requiring additional explanation. "The best revenge," he observed, "is building something so meaningful that the original injury becomes irrelevant." Comment below if you've ever turned your greatest disappointment into your greatest opportunity, because that transformation is exactly what makes life extraordinary. As we walked back toward the museum, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors. A woman who'd learned to define success on her own terms, who'd built something larger than personal achievement, who'd discovered that the most profound victories come from staying true to values that transcend other people's expectations. The scared bride standing alone in an empty gallery 6 years ago couldn't have imagined this version of her life. But she'd made the choices that led here, choosing authenticity over acceptance, choosing growth over comfort, choosing to build something meaningful rather than seeking approval for something impressive. The 63 missed calls had marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. They were the sound of old patterns collapsing and new possibilities emerging. They were proof that sometimes the people who claim to know you best are actually seeing you least clearly. And in the end, they were the perfect soundtrack for a life that refused to be limited by other people's failure of imagination. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and let me know in the comments. What's the best revenge you've ever gotten by simply succeeding beyond everyone's expectations? I read every comment, and your stories inspire the content I create. Watch this next video about a woman who discovered her husband's affair at their anniversary party. The way she handled it will absolutely blow your mind.